Hey, it's Weinstein, and today we're going to talk about how mussels inspired waterproof glues and life-saving surgical adhesives. There's a creature that clings to a wet rock more tightly than most glues you'd find in a hardware store. It has no hands, no tools, no suction cups. Cold waves pound it all day long, trying to tear it loose and drag it into the sea. And it holds on absolutely firm. Meet the ordinary mussel. And its grip puts any superglue to shame. The mussel lives in one of the most brutal places on the planet, the surf zone. This is the edge of the rocks where waves crash again and again. The water covers the stones completely, then pulls back. Impacts, spray, currents, salt. Almost nothing can hold on there. And the mussel doesn't just survive, it sticks to a wet rock so firmly you can barely pry it off. And these aren't gentle picture postcard waves. In the surf zone, water hits with enough force to move rocks. A torrent crashes onto a mussel that would tear away something many times its weight. Imagine being doused day and night from a fire hose while trying to stand firm on a slick, wet stone. That's the world this creature calls home. And here's what's remarkable. Almost any glue we make is useless under those conditions. Try gluing something to a wet rock in the surf with regular adhesive, the waves will rip it off within minutes. Water is the deadliest enemy of bonding. Yet, the mussel holds on for years. It solved a problem chemists are still wrestling with. And it solved it long before we tried. And here's the unexpected turn. We've borrowed the secret of the mussel's grip from the mussel itself. And now we're learning to make adhesives that work underwater and on wet skin. Surgical glues for sealing tissue inside the body, dental adhesives, and bandages that stay put on sweaty skin. This is the story of how a creature from the surf zone made it all the way to the operating room. First, how does the mussel hold on at all? It has no suction cups like an octopus, no claws, no hooks. Instead, it grows a bundle of thin, tough threads that anchor it to the rock like guy wires on a tent. Each thread is glued by its tip to the surface. Together, they hold the creature the way ropes hold a tent in a storm. And these threads are the real hero of the story. This bundle of threads is called the byssus. The mussel secretes it as a liquid that hardens instantly into strong, springy threads right in the water. One end of the byssus grows from the animal's body, the other end is glued to the rock. Strong and slightly elastic, the threads absorb the shock of the waves and keep the mussel in place. But the most interesting part is right at the very tips of those threads. At the tip of every byssus thread is a tiny adhesive pad. That's what locks onto the wet rock so firmly. The mussel essentially applies a specialized natural adhesive to anchor each thread individually. And this glue works exactly where our adhesives fail underwater on a wet surface. The entire trick lies in what the glue is made of. In one very special molecule, the key to the mussel's grip is a substance in its adhesive called catechol. It also goes by another name you may have heard, DOPA. This molecule is what allows the mussel's glue to hold onto a wet rock. It's the secret ingredient, the hero of this whole story. To understand its magic, we first need to understand why water gets in the way of glue at all. Water interferes with bonding quite severely. For any adhesive to grip, it needs to get into direct contact with the surface to press its molecules right up against it. But if the surface is wet, it's covered by a thin film of water, so the adhesive ends up bonded not to the rock, but to that film. It's as if there's always a slippery layer between the glue and the surface. Nothing to grab onto. Imagine trying to stick a sticker to a foggy window. It won't hold. It slides off moisture as the culprit. Or tape on a wet wall. It falls off immediately. That thin film of water wedges itself between the adhesive and the surface and prevents them from connecting. That's exactly why regular glue and a wet surface are natural enemies. The water has to be moved out of the way somehow, and that's the core difficulty. To bond underwater, you first have to push the water away from the contact point. Clear a tiny patch on the surface, displace the interfering film, and only then grab onto the rock. Regular adhesives can't do this. They simply sit on top of the water. The catechol molecule in a mussel's adhesive can do exactly this. That's its whole talent. The catechol molecule does something remarkable. It physically pushes water molecules aside and moves the thin film out of the way. Imagine a hand parting a curtain to touch the wall behind it. Catechol sweeps the water from a tiny patch on the rock and presses itself directly against the now dry surface. The water is no longer blocking the way contact is made, and having cleared a space, catechol immediately seizes the surface, forming a strong bond with it. Not just one kind of bond, but several at once. It can grip rock, metal, and a wide variety of materials. The molecule digs into the surface with a fistful of hooks, so to speak. Displace the water, then grip with everything it has. All of this happening underwater. This phenomenon has a name: catechol adhesion. Adhesion is the scientific word for sticking, for the ability to hold onto a surface. And Catechol, because this particular molecule is doing all the work. It's a special kind of bonding one that doesn't fear water. That's exactly how the mussel holds onto its wet rock. And that's exactly what scientists wanted to reproduce. Compare the two approaches. Regular glue goes in blunt. Flood the surface and hope it sticks. On dry surfaces, it works. On wet ones, it fails because it can't push the water away. Catechol adhesive first gently displaces the water, then forms a firm bond with the surface. It doesn't fight the water, it goes around it. That's the whole difference. And this is genuinely exciting. Wet surfaces are everywhere. In the rain, underwater, inside a living body, on sweaty skin. A glue that water can't stop opens enormous possibilities anywhere. Conventional adhesives fall short. The mussel essentially possesses a superpower bonding in a wet world. And that superpower is something we desperately need, especially in medicine. Scientists cracked the chemistry behind this grip. In 2007, a team led by Haitian Lee and Philip Messersmith published a detailed analysis of mussel adhesive in the prestigious journal Science. They showed exactly how catechol displaces water and bonds to surfaces. They turned the puzzle of a sticky mollusk into understandable chemistry, and into a ready-made recipe for new adhesives. They established that the entire strength of the glue rests on catechol, on that very DOPA molecule. It's the heart of the mussel's waterproof grip. And since we now understood which molecule was responsible for the trick, it became possible to try building the same chemistry into man-made adhesives. The key was found. All that remained was making materials useful to people. And work began in earnest. Scientists then began incorporating catechol chemistry into their own work, creating adhesives and coatings that carry the same secret ingredient as the mussel's byssal. The logic was simple. If catechol performs miracles in nature, let it work in our materials too. The principle from the surf zone stepped into laboratories around the world and became real products. It turned out that catechol chemistry is an almost universal approach. It can make a wide range of materials stick to a huge variety of surfaces, even in wet conditions. It became something like a magic sticky layer that holds where ordinary chemistry gives up. One mussel trick opened the door to a whole range of applications. Let's walk through the main ones. Let's start with medicine where the mussel is needed most. Picture a surgery. The surgeon needs to join tissue, close an incision, stop a leak. The usual tools are sutures, needle and thread. But the inside of the body is thoroughly wet. Blood, fluids, moist tissue everywhere. And we already know that moisture is fatal to ordinary adhesives. There's the problem in full. Regular medical adhesive holds poorly in a wet body for the same reason tape won't stick to a wet wall. Moisture stops it from bonding properly, so surgeons largely rely on sutures and staples. But sutures aren't always ideal. They pierce tissue, leave holes, and sometimes the seam still leaks. What's needed is an adhesive that moisture inside the body simply doesn't phase. And here, the mussel hands us a ready-made idea. If catechol can bond underwater, then a catechol-based adhesive should be able to work inside a wet body as well. A surgical glue built on catechol chemistry could firmly join wet tissue where a regular adhesive would simply fail. A mollusk from the surf zone, without knowing it, showed chemists how to seal wounds inside the body. Imagine, instead of stitching tissue with a needle, the surgeon simply applies a special adhesive and the seam is held firmly even in a wet environment. No piercing the tissue, less trauma, a hermetic seal at the closure. Such a glue could close incisions, stop leaks, and join things that are difficult to stitch. Mussel chemistry right there on the operating table. Particularly valuable is catechol adhesive's ability to truly seal to close tissue so that nothing leaks through. There are places in the body where it's not enough to just bring the edges together, you need to prevent fluid from escaping. Blood vessels, intestines, lungs. A regular suture can't achieve a true seal. A good tissue adhesive closes the seam completely, like a patch, and moisture doesn't hinder it in the least. The next field is dentistry. A mouth is permanently wet. Saliva is everywhere, constantly. And a dentist needs to reliably bond fillings, crowns, and braces that have to stay put for years. Moisture is a constant headache, always interfering with adhesion. Catechol chemistry, which is right at home in wet environments, is perfectly suited here. A glue that saliva can't defeat is every dentist's dream. Dental adhesives built on catechol chemistry could hold far more reliably in a wet mouth. Fewer fillings coming loose, more dependable crowns, stronger fixation overall. If an adhesive can displace water and grip a surface even fully submerged, it will certainly handle a thin film of saliva on a tooth. The mussel suggests the path to beating the ever-present moisture here too. And now, something close to everyone. Bandages. You know how an ordinary plaster peels off the moment your hand sweats, gets wet, or just heats up in summer? Holds for a few minutes, then slides and falls away. Sound familiar? Same old problem. Moisture and sweat defeat the adhesive. And here the Mussel is ready to help again with its waterproof trick. A plaster with cuticle adhesive would stay on wet, sweaty skin where a regular one would have long since fallen off. For an athlete drenched in sweat, for a bandage that can't be changed every hour, for anyone who doesn't want a plaster sliding away at the first hint of moisture, an adhesive inspired by the Mussel grips skin despite sweat, holds on when ordinary ones give up. The Mussel has proven useful in engineering too. There are countless tasks where bonding has to happen in wet conditions or underwater, repairing pipes, ships, and underwater structures, working in humid industrial environments. Ordinary adhesives struggle badly there. A waterproof adhesive modeled on the Mussel holds even in wet conditions. Where water used to ruin everything, cuticle chemistry brings order. Think about it. A glue you can apply underwater and it bonds. For regular adhesive, that sounds like fantasy water would ruin everything. For cuticle, it's home territory, exactly what nature designed it for. Mussels have been bonding underwater for millions of years, and we finally learned to replicate that trick in our own materials. Stop and appreciate the scale of this. The same approach displaced the water, then gripped the surface, works on a wet rock in the surf, in a surgical adhesive, on a tooth under saliva, on sweaty skin under a bandage, and underwater on a pipe. From a wild shoreline to an operating room. One hard-working molecule solves the problem of bonding in a wet world everywhere at once. And this matters because wet surfaces are far more common than the dry, ideal conditions described in adhesive instructions. A living body is wet, skin sweats, weather is often damp. Half the world is underwater. For a long time, all of this was forbidden territory for adhesives. The Mussel showed that you can hold firm here too. It expanded the very map of where bonding is even possible. But let's be honest, the Mussel is an inspiration and a proof of concept, not a finished tube of glue off a shelf. Reproducing its chemistry so that the adhesive is strong, safe for the body, and practical to use is serious work. Especially for medicine, the material has to be non-toxic, cause no rejection, and behave correctly inside the body. Nature supplied the principle, refining it into practice is our job, and the difficulties are real. Understanding how cuticle works is one thing. Building an adhesive on its basis that holds firmly, doesn't harm tissue, doesn't degrade prematurely, and doesn't cost a fortune is quite another. Scientists and doctors are still refining these adhesives, testing them, and working toward clinical use. The Mussel gave us the recipe, but the cooking turned out to be hard. Step by step, and that's completely fine. The Mussel was solving its own problem, staying on a rock under the waves, not stitching our wounds or cementing our filling. Our job is to spot the underlying principle in its basis and adapt it thoughtfully to our own needs. The idea of displacing water with cuticle turned out to be invaluable. The fine details get worked out by each engineer and doctor for their specific application, whether a tissue adhesive or an underwater sealant. So what do we really take from the Mussel? Not the literal basis. We took the chemical idea to bond in a wet world, first displace the water with a cuticle molecule, then grip the surface. That idea is now being built into surgical adhesives, dental bonding agents, and bandages. The principle from a wet rock has made its way into medicine and engineering. A small mollusk, a major hint. So it turns out, an unassuming Mussel on a rock is a brilliant adhesive chemist. It solves a problem we struggled with for a long time, bonding underwater, and solves it elegantly with a single molecule. And it has been doing this for millions of years, long before the first tube of glue. We're only just learning to replicate what it has long mastered. Nature, once again, was ahead right there in the surf zone. And the Mussel also changes how we see familiar sea creatures. We tend to see it at best as food, at worst as something fouling up a dock. But inside, it is cutting-edge adhesive chemistry that laboratories around the world are copying. An utterly ordinary mollusk holds the answer to a problem that had chemists stumped. Sometimes the solution to a big challenge is sitting right on a rock, under the waves. Put it all together, the Mussel clings to a wet rock under pounding waves thanks to the cuticle molecule. It displaces the water and seizes the surface where regular adhesive is completely powerless. We decoded that trick, and now we're learning to glue inside the body, in the mouth, on sweaty skin, and underwater. A victory over water borrowed from a mollusk. Here's the thought to leave with. Sometimes the cleverest obstacle, like a thin film of water that stops everything from sticking, is bypassed by nature with a single smart molecule. The answer to a problem chemists have been battling may have been quietly clinging to a rock in the surf for millions of years. All it takes is a closer look at what's gripping those cliffs and asking how it manages it. And one more thought in closing. We're used to solving problems by force. If the glue isn't holding, pour on more, press harder. The Mussel works with intelligence, not force. It doesn't fight the water, it elegantly goes around it. Maybe the future of technology isn't about pressing harder, but about finding, like the Mussel, a clever workaround. One smart molecule instead of brute force. And catechol chemistry has a future that stretches well beyond adhesives. It's used to create special coatings that adhere to almost any surface. It finds applications in thin films, medical materials, water purification, and electronics. That same trick, sticking firmly to anything, even in a wet environment, turns out to be useful everywhere. One molecule from a Mussel, and an entire fan of technologies. A tiny Mussel that clings to a rock harder than superglue gave us adhesives for a wet world, for operating rooms, for teeth, for sweaty skin, and for working underwater. It's all down to one clever molecule that displaces water rather than brute force. If stories like this are your kind of thing, there are plenty more ahead. Next time, how the mother of pearl inside a shell teaches us to build smartphone screens that don't shatter. Until then, keep looking at the world around you and asking, why does that work? The Mussel has one more secret. Quantity. It doesn't rely on a single thread, it anchors itself with an entire bundle of byssal. Even if a particularly powerful wave tears a few threads loose, the rest hold firm. It's like a safety net. The load is spread across many cables, and losing one isn't fatal. Nature didn't just invent a waterproof adhesive, it backed it up with redundancy, smart on every level at once. There's another subtlety worth noting. Byssal threads aren't rigid, they stretch slightly. When a wave strikes, they flex and spring back, absorbing the jolt instead of snapping. A stiff tether would have long since broken under these impacts. An elastic one holds. So it's not just the adhesive at the tip that matters, it's the thread itself. The Mussel is a master of detail from one end to the other. What's most astonishing of all is that the Mussel doesn't look like a champion. An ordinary, unremarkable shell on a rock, the kind you'd walk past without a second glance. Nothing imposing, nothing flashy, and yet inside it is chemistry that the world's best laboratories are copying. Real wonders often hide in the simplest, most overlooked things. You just have to give yourself the trouble of looking. And you know what's most beautiful about all this? Water, the thing that has always been a curse for adhesives, is simply home territory for the Mussel. It doesn't see moisture as a problem, it lives in it and bonds perfectly. Sometimes, to solve a problem, you have to stop seeing the obstacle as an enemy. The Mussel didn't conquer water by force, it made peace with it. And that may be the deepest lesson of all. So, next time you spot a Mussel on a wet rock, don't walk straight past. This modest creature possesses what chemists dreamed of for decades, the ability to glue underwater. And the bandage that won't come off in sweat, or the surgical adhesive that saves someone on an operating table, may carry the secret of an ordinary shell from the surf. Nature figured all of this out long ago. Our job is simply to look and ask, why does that work? Thank you for being with us. If you find the idea inspiring that nature is our greatest teacher, share this story with someone who still enjoys being amazed by the world. We're already preparing the next one, because nature still holds so many secrets waiting to be discovered. See you next time. Subscribe. Thanks for watching. You're definitely a little smarter now, and you know one more story about how humans borrow their best ideas from nature.